from your branch of Islam in a very negative light, but A, you don't have to watch it, and B, people who do watch it are unlikely to change their view about you or your religion as a consequence of watching what appears to be a slightly odd film. It's 11:31. Holly Harris is here now with your headlines. 25 minutes to 12 is the time. When should a film be pulled by a cinema chain? There are no blasphemy laws in this country, and I think the only film I can remember, which there's a brilliant new documentary about on the way, actually, in which I make a fleeting appearance about the time that the cinema in King's Cross put on A Clockwork Orange, even though it was still illegal. It was still, I don't know, is it against the law when the director removes it from circulation? In this case, of course, Stanley Kubrick, and he asked Warner Brothers to withdraw the film permanently in the UK. But it must have been illegal because the cinema got essentially closed down as a consequence of screening it. And by an amazing little twist of history, I was there, would you believe, when it was shown. I must have told you this before. I went to see If, which also stars Malcolm McDowell. And I didn't know why, but it said mystery feature comes on after If. And so I'm there in the cinema. I'd taken a girlfriend to see it, actually. I don't know how impressed she was, but If is an absolutely brilliant film. The director Lindsay Anderson made the film, but because it had the same actor starring in it. When If finished and A Clockwork Orange started, all these people shuffled into the cinema. The kind of people who carry large carrier bags around full of documents and copies of Sight and Sound magazine. And so I said to my girlfriend, look, well, something's going on here. I don't quite understand what it is, but why are there more people turning up for the mystery feature that's coming on after If than there are for the original film that was actually advertised? And then the screen, you remember that, you've seen the certificates that come up on the screen, and it was A Clockwork Orange, and all these fellas started cheering, and one of them shouted, "About bloody time!" And obviously I was witnessing cinematic history entirely by accident. But apart from a director saying to a distributor, "We don't think this should ever be shown," who gets to decide when a film is not shown? On principle as opposed to practice. Because in practice, it's only like Cineworld not showing this film, The Lady of Heaven, is only the same as a pub having a sign up outside saying the management reserves the right to refuse entry, or it's a commercial decision based in this case on fear of the protests or the impacts of the protests. So where do you stand on this? And can you marry together the principle and the practice in an issue such as this? Dilly's in Bedford. Dilly, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. It's Dilly Hussain. I'm the deputy editor of Five Pillars, Muslim news website who first broke this story. How are you? I'm
pretty good. 6 months ago, I think you reviewed it.
We did indeed.
Pure, unadulterated sectarian filth. So I'm guessing that's not a 5-star review, Dilly.
Definitely not. I think it's important for your listeners, if I may, just to give a very brief context to the movie.
Sure.
I know the previous caller tried giving some Islamic historical context, but it's important for the viewers to understand that there's around 1.6 billion, 1.7 billion Muslims around the world, of which 85% are Sunnis and 15% are Shia. And of the 85%, it is a unanimous consensus that those individuals that were depicted in a very, very, very derogatory way in that movie, whether you see it from a racial point of view, whether you see it from a historical inaccuracy point of view, that there is a unanimous consensus. And I know there's a huge debate about whether free speech is the right to offend or not. There is a consensus amongst over 1.3 billion people.
But listen, mate, let's not fall out. But there's no way you've actually canvassed opinion from 1.3 billion people before coming on the radio this morning. So just talk to me about what we know to be true. The reason why lots and lots of people are upset.
What we know to be true. What we know to be true. What we know to be true, James.
Yes.
Is that more than 1.3 billion people hold those individuals that were depicted in that movie as very revered individuals and very sacred.
Exactly.
Now, it's also important to know who's behind the movie.
No, it isn't. No, not to me. I want you to tell me whether or not you think it should be somehow banned and who should make the decision about what film I can watch in Britain.
Well, that should come down to the Cineworld and View and the commercial outlets who decides to screen it and then pull it.
But if they're pulling it because of protests, that's not actually a sort of exercise of cultural autonomy, is it? That's actual sort of blackmail.
Well, just to quote...
threatening with menaces almost. So who do you think should decide whether or not I can watch this film?
Just to quote the individual spokesman who came out in Birmingham,
Yes.
Cineworld, said that they are at the heart of the community.
Yes.
And because they are at the heart of the community, the people that are protesting are people who frequent the cinema.
Yes.
So obviously,
That's fine. But who do you think should decide what films I can watch in my local cinema?
It should be Cineworld and View, isn't it?
Okay. So if it was somewhere that doesn't have a large Muslim population, you guys would be super cool with it.
No, I don't think it would be super cool with it being aired in any cinema.
So it's got nothing to do with the local community then.
No, you asked me who makes the decision.
Yes.
Muslims
And you told me
can protest.
Cineworld made the decision because of the local community.
No, you asked me who makes the decision or who should
No, I
make
said,
the
who do
decision.
you think should decide? And you said Cineworld, and then you quite correctly quoted the local spokesman for Cineworld who referenced directly the local community. So your rationale is clearly that it should be a decision made by film screeners based upon the views of the local community or their role in the local community. So I say to you, let's find an area where there aren't many Muslims, and is it okay to show it there? And you still say no. So who decides whether? But what if Cineworld want to show it in an area where there aren't any Muslims, given that their own rationale, which you just quoted, was entirely about the local community? So I'll ask you again, Dilly, who should decide what films I can watch in the UK in 2022?
If it's something pertaining to someone's religion and faith and beliefs and it's being wholly misrepresented with historical.
So that's Life of Brian. That's Life of Brian out. That's Jerry Springer the Opera out. These all get actually banned.
I'm sorry, you're making a false comparison between those and the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Yes,
Jerry
but the
Springer,
Life of Brian is a kind of pastiche about the life of Jesus. And The Last Temptation of Christ by Nhs Contract, as you'll know, posits the idea that Jesus was never even crucified. And Jerry Springer the Opera suggests that Jesus might have been a little bit gay. So under your ruling...
That's Christianity for you. That's
yes, but you used the word religion, mate, I'm afraid. You talked about people's religious sensibilities, so I'm just mentioning some other religion. So I'm going to ask you again, actually, who should decide...
In the context of Islam or Muslims.
Hey, there's no... Listen, the question is really simple. Who should decide what films I can watch in the UK in 2022? Me or you?
What do you mean by me or you? I don't understand.
Well, you're here to tell me I shouldn't be able to watch this film. And so I'm... Yes, you are. You're saying it shouldn't be on in this country.
James, let me finish my sentence because you seem to be interrupting. You don't let me finish my sentence.
Wait, we just had a 4-second pause. How can you say I'm interrupting you? Let me remind you what the question is. Who should decide what films I can watch in the UK in 2022? Me or you?
If it's a movie about my religious beliefs and the religious beliefs of a community, they should decide.
But I don't have those beliefs.
Okay, well, in that case, you should then at least be known that the movie you're about to watch or you're about to embark on watching is full of historical lies and is actually seen as incitement to hatred.
Lots of films are full of historical lies or historical misrepresentations.
Do you know today there was a gentleman that was found guilty for writing "Burn Old Fella" after Captain Tom died? He was found guilty for that. That's one individual. That's one individual who was found guilty.
Yes, that might be relevant to some conversations, but it's not relevant to this one. So listen, Dilly, you may not have realised this when you rang in, but you're here to tell me that you should decide what films I can watch in the United Kingdom in 2022 because of your beliefs and sensibilities. You must see how ridiculous that is.
Not necessarily, not at all, actually.
Well, let me help you out, okay? If you get to decide what I can watch because of your beliefs and sensibilities, I get to decide what you can watch because of my beliefs and sensibilities. So I'm going to ban you from watching EastEnders.
Not a problem. I wouldn't lose sleep over it.
Yeah, you may have missed the point there, Dilly. I'm going to ban you from watching anything ever, which is kind of what the Taliban do, isn't it?
Well, the states and governments make decisions that they want to.
No. The states and governments haven't made any decisions here. You have.
No, but you've just given the example that I'm going to ban you
and
from
the people protesting have. So you honestly think that you get to decide what I can watch? And you must see how wrong that is, my friend.
No, not at all, James.
Okay, so talk me through why you should get to decide what films I can watch.
Okay, because non-Muslims are going to watch Lady of Heaven.
But they're probably not, to be honest, until you lot started protesting about it. You've probably done more marketing for whoever made this film than the best PR company in the country. But just talk me through why you should decide what I can watch.
So when non-Muslims go and watch Lady of Heaven, or anyone goes and watches this movie, Lady of Heaven, it is filled with historical and religious lies about the faith of Islam. When they watch that movie, they leave. And they will start believing many of those lies, of which the person behind it, Yasser al-Habib, is seen as an insightful hate preacher.
But unfortunately, mate, Shakespeare in Love is full of historical inaccuracies. JFK is full of historical inaccuracies. Gladiator, I hope this doesn't come as a major shock to you, is not a piece of historically accurate cinema. You've got plenty of it. Marie Antoinette, 10,000 BC. There are even charts on the internet about the most historically inaccurate movies of all time. So you simply can't have that as a reason for banning this film, unless you would also want to ban, under your own rationale, Dilly, you'd be banning Shakespeare in Love, you'd be banning JFK, you'd be banning Gladiator, U-571, a film about a German submarine that was commandeered by disguised American submariners as they attempted to capture the Enigma cipher machine in the Second World War, Apocalypto in 2006, which is sort of set in a Mayan Amazonian rainforest. You'd have 300, that rather good film about the Spartans that was released in 2006. You'd be banning 10,000 BC, you'd be banning Marie Antoinette, you'd be banning The Last Samurai, starring Tom Cruise, which I grant you, there are some grounds for doing that, but they're grounds of taste, mate, not grounds of historical inaccuracy. You'd be banning The Patriot, starring Mel Gibson. Alexander would be on the list as well. Even Braveheart. No one wants to ban Braveheart, mate, but it's about as historically accurate as the film you're describing. I haven't finished yet. Argo, we'd have to get rid of Argo. Pearl Harbor would be toast. And finally, this would really upset my daughters, we'd have to ban Pocahontas as well. Under your rationale, Dilly. Which of those films would you allow me? Which of those films would you allow me to watch? Which of those films would you allow me to watch?
I'll let you watch all of them.
But they're full of historical inaccuracies.
But no one cares about those movies.
I do. I care about all of them.
No, they don't. There's no protest outside. No one cares about those movies.
I see. It's only if people can be persuaded to protest outside a cinema that a film should be banned.
Yeah, no one cares.
Okay, Dilly.
No one cares about Pearl Harbor.
Okay. On a scale of 1 to 10, Dilly, how well do you think this conversation has gone for you?
I don't know, really. It was all subjective to the listener, really.
Yeah, okay, I'm happy with that. It's 11:47. 51 minutes after 11. Stop sending me instances of historical inaccuracies in films. That's not the point that's not the broader point of the conversation. Although, if you're under any confusion, and like Dilly, it rang in good faith about why it's ridiculous to ban films on the grounds of other people's religious beliefs. I'd refer you to a so-called Christian preacher in America who said yesterday that all gay people should be executed, and he claims that's based on his religious beliefs and his religious sensibilities. That's a man called Dylan Oars who said they should be lined up against the wall and shot in the back of the head. That's what God teaches. That's what the Bible says. So you can't, I'm afraid, make decisions based upon the stated or ostensible religious beliefs of anybody about what other people who don't share those beliefs should and should not be allowed to do. But I do appreciate how hard that is sometimes to accept. And again, I can't argue with the cinema's decision to pull the film, given that these protests are popular and potentially very damaging to business. But that's what this is about. And the idea that you get to decide what I can watch is patently ridiculous. Theo Washwood is here. Give us a quick heads up. I'm going to talk to Abdul, who's run from Saudi Arabia, so that would be an interesting perspective on this conversation. But why have you marched into this studio and started laying down the law about crossing early to PMQs before Keir Starmer gets to his feet?
Because Andrew Mitchell, I think, is going to ask the question before Keir Starmer does. He's got his number 2 on the order paper. And of course, Andrew Mitchell has been very critical of Boris Johnson and very honest about the relationship between Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party, that the Prime Minister doesn't actually have a base within the Conservative Party, that it is a transactional relationship, and that he's always done and that's always based on the fact that he polls ahead of the Conservative Party, that he can win parts of the electorate that the Tory Party on its own with one of its typical leaders.
I have to point out every time in the past where you've said, "Oh, this could be good. We should keep an eye on this because you might actually get some blue on blue attacks." So there's every chance Andrew Mitchell will stand up and say, "Does the Prime Minister agree with me that the new bottle bank in Sutton Coldfield is a magnificent augmentation to an already wonderful borough of Birmingham?"
And then you have after,
but that could happen, couldn't it? And that's what you want us to cross early for.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, not the recycling.
But the fact that he's going to ask a question that you think might be really interesting, but it could be about a bottle bank in Sutton Coldfield, couldn't it?
Yeah, but
it's a risk we're going to take, Theo. We've followed your lead on this one. I just want people to be aware that if it does turn out to be a question about a bottle bank in Sutton Coldfield, this is entirely on you.
No.
Yes.
No.
Who then?
Nobody. It's just, I'm just
All right.
I'm just trying to play chances. The other one to listen out for, of course, is Oliver Heald, who has said that he's been appalled by the behaviour in Downing Street.
So there's two. And will they both become Starmer, or is that after?
So
Starmer?
I think Oliver Heald will actually be after Starmer.
All right. Well, you'll stay with us, and then you can talk us through all of this. A quick call first from Abdul, who's in Al Hassa in Saudi Arabia, on the question of censoring this film. Abdul, what made you pick up the phone?
I always enjoy listening to you, James. This is a bit interesting, and the answer to your questions is cinema shouldn't have pulled the film out. These people outside protesting, the police should have dealt with them, not young people trying to make a living out of cinema. Who should decide? Please, it's the Cineworld and the UK governing body who looks after the cinemas.
Yes.
I think more importantly, the reason I rang, because I've seen some of the film. If we to get serious about the contents of the film, it really does paint a picture to you, to your researcher, to your producer, if they decide to watch the film out of interest, that Sunni Muslims, Sunni Muslims who followed the Prophet after he died, governing, and 4 of them, and it went on for 30 years. 30 years after the Prophet died, it was the place was run by 4 people, and they paint a really not a very nice.
It's a deeply and deliberately offensive depiction of key figures from the Sunni.
Exactly. So for me,
but you still don't think that's grounds for banning it or pulling it from broadcast?
No, I don't think so.
I must, because I don't want to run out of time. We must both just acknowledge the irony of me taking a call from Saudi Arabia, making the point about censorship. Although I agree with you, in terms of geography, this is quite ironic, isn't it?
Yeah. To some extent.
Yeah.
Cinemas are functioning in Saudi Arabia, as I did last time. I've been here for 5 years. I enjoy it. Sure. It's nice.
No, I understand that. In a way, it's a compliment to the conversation rather than a zinger or a gotcha point. It's just we probably wouldn't be able to have conversations such as the ones we have on this program every day in the country where you're calling from.
James, I'm really confident that anyone could ring you today and talk to you. It probably is a language issue.
About the film, not about what do you think about the king, for example.
Not necessarily about the king.
Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you.
You're getting me into trouble, mate.
That's my point.
About the film,
yes.
I think, as I said, it would generate more division than uniting. The two, as you call them, branches of Islam is 85% to 15%. Trust me. I work here. Today, I will be eating, drinking, chatting, going out with my friends who are Shia, and there's absolutely no problems at all. But as I said, going back to the point that if you go and watch the film today, you may come out of the cinema thinking, oh, those guys are Sunni.
Yeah.
And subconsciously, you will get that belief that the Sunni... Do you know what I mean?
Which means I need more input and more information. As I read it, this film is essentially directed at Shias who want to have their prejudices about Sunnis endorsed and enforced. I can't really see any other target audience for it. Can you?
Unfortunately, I think I have to agree with you, and I'm not comfortable with that. And if there's
I'm not super comfortable with it, but I'm afraid it is a freedom of speech issue. It is a freedom of expression.
But that's what I said.
Yeah. I know you should
go. Gone ahead with it. It's the UK. Everybody's got the right to watch and listen and do whatever they like, as long as it's not affecting anyone. Harm. There's no. Do you know what I mean?
There it is. Yeah, I do. And yet, at the same time, I mean, you say the police should have dealt with the crowd. In the absence of that level of policing, I can't criticise the cinema decision for the pragmatic reasons behind the decision that they took. And I know you take this in the spirit that it's intended. It's pretty magnificent, actually, on this little radio show that we're having a conversation about this film and an anti-censorship voice comes in from Saudi Arabia. And I mean that in the best possible sense. Should we cross live now? I mean,
Not yet, no.
All right.
No, it's when it was
do?
Andrew Mitchell. Well, you wanted to talk
Let me have a
about...
word with Keith. We're going to drop the news, mate. We're going to just keep an eye on the screen, are we? Because Theo said that it might be really interesting before Keir Starmer starts.
So you wanted to discuss
hang on.
another
Hang on. Do you know what Andrew Mitchell looks like? No, Andrew Mitchell, not David Mitchell. So are we going to keep on? Can you see the screen from where you're sitting?
Yes, I can see the screen, yes.
All right.
Keith set it up so you
okay,
can see
so Theo will give me the signal, then I'll give you the signal, and we'll cross live and see what Andrew Mitchell's going to say. Is everyone happy with that? Everybody? Keith, you happy? Theo, you happy?
Yeah, happy.
All right.
Right.
Sorry.
So you wanted to discuss another story, didn't you, James?
Well, I don't know if now's the time to do that.
We'll do that later.
We'll do that a little later. A strange story which explains perhaps why Nadeem Zahawi is trending. So we are, just looking out for Andrew Mitchell, who may not get to his feet before Keir Starmer.
No. Okay, so let's just talk quickly about Keir Starmer and the questions he's going to ask. I don't imagine he's going to try and, quote unquote, intrude on the Conservative Party grief. He will keep his questions, I would imagine, on the cost of living, petrol now surpassing £2 a litre on some forecourts. He may pick up on the NHS. This is Health Week for the NHS, and you saw that video, James, where people were being told in an A&E waiting room they'd have to wait 7 hours to see a doctor. Keir Starmer may well go down that line, and then he will bring in, I would imagine, jokes or jibes or asides for Boris Johnson about the fact that he doesn't have the support of his backbenchers behind him. But listen,
and we might hear the figure 4 in 10 at some point, or that exactly. Sort of thing. Yeah.
And of course the excuses that number 10 and Boris Johnson's supporters came out with, that everything was fine and it was a decisive victory. That's the way I'd imagine Keir Starmer's going to play it, rather than giving Boris Johnson and his supporters in the House of Commons the opportunity to, quote unquote, circle the wagons and say, well, Boris Johnson to say, look, the real enemy is over there, it's Keir Starmer, you don't want him to be in power.
OECD has just forecast that the UK is set to have the lowest growth in the developed world. That's G7 and OECD members, apart from Russia, which is, of course, heavily sanctioned. Is that the sort of thing Starmer might pull out of the bag? Because Johnson continues to claim the precise opposite.
We've discussed this previously, where Keir Starmer has tried to ensure that Boris Johnson takes ownership for the current state of the economy, that in the same way that the Tories made Labour own the 2008 financial crash. Of course, it was due to the subprime market and the mortgage market in the United States, but not to allow him to say, well, we've got global headwinds of inflation, we've got the Ukraine crisis, we've got supply shortages because we're coming out of the pandemic. So that's exactly the type of figure I'd imagine, if Keir Starmer can pivot quickly enough, or his team can pivot quickly enough, that he will try and bring into his 6 questions at the dispatch box in the next few moments. Boris Johnson is on his feet. He's answering the first question from Angela Eagle. It should go Labour, Tory, and of course, and then back to Keir Starmer as leader of the opposition. And the next Tory, of course, is Andrew Mitchell. He may ask about bottle banks, but of course, he has been known to be a vocal critic of the Prime Minister. He's a former chief whip. He's a former international development secretary. He has the gravitas, the standing on the back benches, that if he wanted to go down the route of David Davis went down a few months ago and try and hold the...
Okay, here he is, I think.
Speaker,
let's see.
The whole House will unite behind the Prime Minister on his determination to hold Ukrainian war criminals to account. But is he aware that there are 5 alleged Rwandan war crimes perpetrators living freely in the UK who have been doing so now for 16 years and have neither been extradited nor put before the British courts under our existing laws? As he prepares to go down to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Rwanda, will he look carefully at this issue, because it is bound to be raised with him, and will he reassure the House and the Rwandan government he takes these matters extremely seriously, and what has so far been justice massively delayed for 16 years will not be grotesquely denied?
Prime Minister. I thank my right honourable friend for his question, and he raises an issue on which The UK has campaigned for a long time, and no country is more committed than we are to bringing war criminals to justice. I know that my right honourable friend, the Deputy Prime Minister, has raised the subject recently with the International Criminal Court. However, as he knows, and I will certainly, of course, study the case and take it up as appropriately, it is the subject of an ongoing investigation. It would not be appropriate for me to comment on it further.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I couldn't make out whether that introductory noise was cheers or boos. The trouble is, I don't know whether it's directed at me or him. I joined the Prime Minister in his comments about carers. Why did his Culture Secretary, I think hiding along the bench, say that successive Conservative governments left our health service wanting and inadequate when the pandemic hit?
Mr. Speaker, everybody knows that when the pandemic hit, it was an entirely novel virus for which the whole world was unprepared. And nobody at that stage, nobody knew how to test for it. Nobody knew what the right quarantine rules should be, Mr. Speaker. But as it happened, the UK government and our amazing NHS produced, not only approved the first vaccine anywhere in the world. We were the first to get it into anybody's arms, Mr. Speaker, and we had the fastest rollout anywhere in Europe, none of which would have been possible if we'd listened to him.
I think the Prime Minister just agreed with the Culture Secretary. Perhaps she said it. They didn't deny it. Perhaps she said it because it's true.
Yeah, exactly.
It starts with GPs. People were unhappy with the service they were getting before the pandemic. Not enough GPs. Too hard to get an appointment. That's why he promised 6,000 new GPs. But his health secretary admits he won't keep that promise. Despite the hard work of doctors, people can't see a GP in person. They're unhappier than ever with GP services. If GP provision was wanting and inadequate before the pandemic, what is it now?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid he's simply wrong, because he's wrong about what we're doing. And of course, we've got to clear the COVID backlogs, and everybody understands that. Everybody understands the pressure that the NHS is under. But they are responding magnificently, and I can tell him that thanks to the investments that this government has put in, we now have 4,300 more doctors. We have record numbers. We have record numbers in training, and to the best of my we have 11,800 more nurses this year than last year, Mr. Speaker, and 72,000 in training, and that is because of the investment that we put in, which was opposed by the party opposite. And the only reason we were able to make that investment, Mr. Speaker, is because we have a strong and robust economy, thanks to the decisions we took.
Mr. Speaker, of course he talks big, but I've got a letter here to the Prime Minister from the Honourable Member from Hereford and South Herefordshire. He said, this is you, Prime Minister, under you the government seems to lack a sense of mission. It has a large majority but no long-term plan. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's Big Plan Act is so tired that even once loyal MPs don't believe him. And it's not just waiting for a GP, it's waiting for all NHS treatment. Take cancer. For over a decade, waiting times for cancer care have been going up. His solution was supposed to be diagnostic hubs. The Health Secretary has been on a victory lap this week. But here's the rub, Prime Minister. Since they were opened last year, 135,000 extra people are now waiting for scans and tests. Can he think of a better way to describe soaring cancer waiting lists than wanting and inadequate?
Mr. Speaker, it is entirely right after the pandemic that people are now coming forward to get their cancer tests, and we have actively encouraged that, and that is the right thing for people to do. But as a result of the community diagnostic hubs that we are bringing in, 100 of them across the country, Mr. Speaker, we are able to cut the times for cancer diagnosis, help people to get their scans, their tests faster, and above all, we can do that, Mr. Speaker, because we're hiring more radiographers, we're hiring more nurses, we're hiring more professionals in our NHS because of the investments that we made, which, as I say, the party of Bevan tragically opposed.
Mr. Speaker, the problem is the cancer rates have been going up for 10 years, and they're even higher now. So blaming the pandemic just won't wash. Perhaps the Culture Secretary was talking about the state of NHS buildings. Before the pandemic, the NAO said they were a risk to patients. The government's response, paint jobs and fix-ups, pretending that's the same as building new hospitals. The Treasurer and the Cabinet Office apparently don't think that the refurbs are even going to be delivered. Take University Hospital North Tees. The ceiling is falling in, the roof leaks, and staff have to hose down the pipes to stop them freezing over. Failure to fix wanting and inadequate NHS buildings is putting patients at risk, isn't it, Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, this line of criticism is satirical, coming from a Labour government, attacking our hospital building programme, Mr. Speaker, where they were the authors of the PFI scheme that bankrupted so many hospitals. Mr. Speaker, what we're doing instead is building 48 new hospitals. Yes, we are. Thanks to the biggest capital investment programme in the history of the NHS. From memory, we put £33 billion as soon as we came in, then another 92 to cope with the pandemic, plus another £39 billion in the health and care levy. They opposed that funding. They opposed the health and care levy. They don't have a leg to stand on. We're building the foundations of our NHS's, our health services' future, and they should support it.
Can I just say to both of you, you need to calm down, and there's two over here as well. The four of you could have a very nice cup of tea if you wish. Keir Starmer.
Oh dear. Prime Minister. Dear. Pretending. Mr. Speaker, pretending no rules for Prime Minister, he chunters on. Pretending no rules were broken didn't work. Pretending the economy is booming didn't work. And pretending to build 40 new hospitals won't work either. They want him to change, but he can't. As always with this Prime Minister, when he's falling short, he just changes the rules and lowers the bar. In March, he proposed changing the NHS contract. He wants to double the length of time patients can be made to wait for surgery, from 1 year to 2 years. On top of that, he scrapped zero tolerance of 12-hour waits at A&E. 24 hours at A&E used to be a TV programme. Now it's his policy. Well, it's Health Week. And he's telling all of them.
Order! Mr. Cleverley, we've got a tea party gathering. I'm sure you don't want to be part of it. I will hear the question. The problem is, so do our constituents. I wonder if I were you, And I think one or two of you might be going early. What I would say is, look, I need to hear the question in the same way I expect to hear the answer. So please, Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I bet they wish they were this organised on Monday. Well, Mr. Speaker, it's Health Week, and he's telling them he's going to turn over a new leaf. So why doesn't he start by scrapping his plans to greenlight wanting and inadequate NHS standards?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, look, I've got to tell him, I just think this line of attack is not working, Mr. Speaker. But it's not working. It's not working because they refuse to approve.
Once again, I think the two of you need to calm down. So please, we don't want to see an empty front bench, Prime Minister.
Look, we've not only raised the standards in the NHS, we're not only reducing waiting times for those who have had to wait the longest, Mr. Speaker, but what we're doing more fundamentally is doing what the people of this country can see is simple common sense, and that is using our economic strength to invest in doctors and nurses and get people on the wards, get people, giving people their scans and their screens and their tests in a more timely manner and taking our NHS forward. We are on target, Mr. Speaker, thanks to this government, to recruit 50,000 more nurses. Thanks to the investments, I've just got to repeat this because he doesn't seem to have heard it so far, thanks to the investments that party opposed. Perhaps he can now explain why they opposed them.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, raising taxes because you failed to grow the economy isn't a plan for the NHS, and everyone sitting behind him knows it. Members of his cabinet admit that Conservatives left our health system wanting and inadequate when the pandemic hit. He's been in power for 3 years, and things are getting worse, not better. Fewer GPs, more waits for cancer tests, buildings still crumbling, and he's changing the rules to cover up his failure. And there is a real human pain as a result. Today I spoke to Hamza Semakula. Hamza is 20 and he plays semi-professional football for Hendon. He tore his ACL earlier this year. Because of the 2-year wait for surgery, he had to crowdfund for a private operation. Shameful. I also spoke to Akshay Patel. Last year, his mother woke up unable to breathe. Akshay called 999 6 times. In his last call, he said, "I rang an hour ago for an ambulance as she had difficulty breathing, and now she's dead." Even he must admit that Akshay, Bina and Hamza deserve better than a wanting and inadequate government utterly unable to improve our NHS.
Mr. Speaker, I think everybody in the House has sympathy with Akshay and the other constituents and their families and the other constituents that he mentions, Mr. Speaker, and I share their feelings. But when you look at what this government is doing, the massive and I must say this to him, we are making colossal investments in our NHS. We are cutting waiting times. We're raising standards. We're paying nurses more. We're supporting our fantastic NHS. And by the way, he continually came to this. I just remind him of this and said that we had the worst COVID record in Europe. Turned out to be completely untrue. He still hasn't retracted it. We're doing it, Mr. Speaker. We can make those investments because of the strength of the UK economy, because of the fiscal firepower that we have to deploy. We have the lowest unemployment now since 1974, and we are going to continue to grow our economy for the long term. He asked about the mission of this government, Mr. Speaker. It is to unite and level up across our whole country, to unleash the potential of our entire country. The biggest tutoring programme in history for young people, raising literacy and numeracy standards for 11-year-olds from 65% adequacy to our 90%. That is the highest objective I think a government could achieve. Expanding home ownership for millions of people, as my right honourable friend for Duluth and I will do, for millions of people who currently don't have it. Cutting the costs of cutting the costs of business to make this the enterprise centre of Europe. That is our vision, creating high-wage, high-skilled jobs for this country. And as for jobs, I'm going to get on with mine, and I hope he gets on with his.
But I didn't know you were so popular. Come on.
Well, we love all of us. Changing the subject completely, in North East Hertfordshire, we're very concerned about sewage overflows into our precious chalk streams. And this is damaging to the flora and fauna and also restricts the use of these precious streams for leisure. The Environment Bill included some important measures last year, and I welcome the fact that the government has consulted on its reduction plan for storm overflows. But when would we expect to see some meaningful improvements and some real reductions in the amount of sewage going into our rivers?
Minister.
Yeah, well, I thank you very much, and I share his concern.
It's quite an important question from Sir Oliver Hill. Not quite bottle banks in Sutton Coldfield, but it's a heck of a lot closer to chalk streams in Herefordshire are a heck of a lot closer to bottle banks in Sutton Coldfield than what Theo Westwood suggested was likely to be happening.
Ensuring that the water companies do more to deliver on their obligations. We will not hesitate to take further action as needed.
We now come to the leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition in supporting our carers? Mr. Speaker, week after week, I've called on this Prime Minister to resign. I've been met with a wall of noise from the Tory benches. I thought they were trying to shout me down, but all this time... Mr. Speaker, it turns out that 41% of them have been cheering me on. Because, Mr. Speaker, let's be clear, at least the numbers don't lie. 41% of his own MPs have no confidence in him. 66 of MPs across the House don't support him, and 97% of Scottish MPs want the Minister for the Union shown the door. Lame duck Prime Minister presiding over a divided party in a disunited kingdom. So, how does the Prime Minister expect to continue when even unionist leaders in Scotland won't back him?
Prime Minister.
I want to thank the right honourable gentleman for his characteristic warm words. And actually, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that the biggest and most powerful and effective advocate of the United Kingdom over the last time that I've been in has been that man there. I don't know how long he's going to last here as leader of the SNP, the Scottish National Congress. Long may he rest in place, Mr. Speaker. He is the Araldite that's keeping our kingdom together. I thank him for what he's doing.
Blackford.
Well, I can say to the Prime Minister. I can say to the Prime Minister that I'll be standing shoulder to shoulder with our First Minister as we take our country to independence. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is acting like Monty Python's Black Knight, running around declaring it's just a flesh wound. And no amount of delusion and denial will save the Prime Minister from the truth. This story won't go away until he goes away. For once in his life, he needs to wake up to reality. Prime Minister, it's over. It's done. The Prime Minister has no options left, but Scotland does. Scotland has the choice of an independent future. Because it's not just the Prime Minister that we have zero confidence in. It's the broken Westminster system that puts a man like him in power. Exactly. Can he tell us, can the Prime Minister tell us how it is democratic that Scotland is stuck with a Prime Minister we don't trust, a Conservative Party we don't support, and Tory governments we haven't voted for since 1955?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we had a referendum, as I've told the House before, in 2014. I think he should respect the mandate of the people. And he keeps saying that he wants his independence for his country. Our country is independent, Mr. Speaker. Our country is independent. Then he tried 48 times to reverse it to the leader of the opposition. And the only way that independence would ever be reversed is if we had the disaster, Mr. Speaker, of a Labour SNP coalition to take us back into the EU.
Mr. McVeigh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this week, the Prime Minister said, you cannot spend your way out of inflation, you cannot tax your way into growth, we will cut the cost of government. Here, I completely agree. So when can I suggest a strong start that he scraps the inflated white elephant that is HS2, saving the government tens of billions of pounds from a budget that is spiralling out of control?
Prime Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend. In case she missed what else I said.
I apologise. I probably should have. If I'd realised it was Esther McVeigh speaking, I'd have come out a little bit earlier. But Theo Ashwood is still with us, going over that PMQ. It's a weird one, actually. It's odd that I don't know where the raucousness was coming from, but if 4 in 10 of your own your own MPs, it's just 7.5 in 10 of your own backbenchers have just announced that they've got no confidence in you. Those cheers sound a little bit hollow, don't they?
It's a tough one,
isn't it?
And of course, you heard from Oliver Hild. He started by talking about getting sewage out of rivers, and there was laughter because, of course, Oliver Hild has previously criticised the Prime Minister and whether he was alluding to in the opening of his remarks about the problems of pollution in his constituency, I think up in Herefordshire. He was actually talking about making some jibe at number 10, and of course Andrew Mitchell made the point about Rwanda and of course there could be seen to be some criticisms of the government's immigration policy.
It's a very good question,
well.
that. We've got 5 alleged war criminals living here who haven't been deported.
So why?
And yet the policy, Priti Patel's policy, is literally to deport people who may well be bona fide asylum seekers, genuine refugees fleeing war, famine, earthquake, flood, torture. They can be deported, but people who are accused of doing war crimes, so possibly including torture, they've been here for years unmolested.
So, and of course Boris
Johnson.
It's
a very strong line there. I wonder if Starmer should have come up with it.
So Keir Starmer has not tended to talk about the Rwanda immigration policy perhaps as much as he could. It seems
because it's designed to appease the racists, and he
goes
needs
into
to do that
box
too.
Mark Brexit,
doesn't it? Yeah.
So what Boris Johnson said was it was an ongoing case and he was going to look into it, but he said that he would. There was nowhere really for him to go. But the point I'd make is that Andrew Mitchell is from that part of the Conservative Party that is very unhappy, generally speaking, about the policy when it comes to deporting people who are seeking asylum in this country to Rwanda. Jesse Norman, and that was the letter referenced by Keir Starmer in his criticism of Boris Johnson, described the policy as ugly. And so you could draw a parallel there. Keir Starmer going in as we suspected he would on the NHS. He had a couple of good lines referencing that film, saying the Prime Minister's policy was meant is 24 hours in A&E used to be a TV programme. Now it's the Prime Minister's policy. And at times Boris Johnson it was fragmented. What usually happens after a particularly large rebellion, when it's a rebellion over a piece of legislation, it seems to have happened here, is that you don't have free-flowing dissent as you might expect. Conservative MPs in particular see that as a little bit tasteless, and so they tend to at least try and show some
I think
loyalty.
Tobias Ellwood said he'd be keeping his counsel for a while, didn't he?
Exactly, and the next date in the diary is, of course, June the 23rd.
That's
which
the
is the
by-election. And then you've got the Privileges Committee reporting as well.
Which will probably come
some
in
point later
in the year.
And speaking of committees, the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Democracy and the Constitution has reported back a little bit earlier today, saying that UK ministers, you mentioned the refugee policy, have acted in a constitutionally problematic or improper manner when publicly attacking judges. This is an inquiry by a group of peers and MPs, saying in a report on challenges to the independence of the judiciary that there was no persuasive evidence to justify accusations by politicians and the media that judges had interfered in politics. It found that the actions of the government had had a concerning impact on the judiciary, prompting low morale. And oddly enough, an insider, a so-called insider, told one newspaper today, I think it was the Mail, similar attacks actually just still being undertaken from the Home Office, but that was more against solicitors, against lawyers, as opposed to judges. But that's another example of something that in normal times would be a very big deal, but with this government it's just more grist to the mill.
One of the defences from Boris Johnson was, and this was in the face particularly on the attacks on the NHS, was that the government is spending money on the NHS. He pointed to the fact that there were 11,800 new nurses compared to last year. Of course, the key word in that is new, and it doesn't take into account all of those nurses that have left the profession since. And he also made the same claim when I think it's.
But we do this every week, don't we? And it never stops. He'll pop up again and repeat himself next week. He's still talking about the unemployment levels being so low without mentioning that they're even lower than the number of.
So it's technically correct.
Yeah.
Because he said,
but it's not actually something you should be boasting about.
Because of all the people who've left the profession, whether it be GPs or nurses.
Hertfordshire, not Herefordshire, the chalk stream. My bad. No, it was my bad, not yours. I'm correcting myself on that one. What are we going to do for the next half an hour of the programme?
There was another story you wanted to discuss, James.
Oh, stay there. Can you stay there? Are you busy? You got top snout, secret? No, you got meetings in phone boxes? No. False moustaches? No?
Not today.
Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. It is 12:33. Theo Ashford's still with me, picking over the bones of PMQs. My gut shot reaction to that was that Starmer really, if he didn't fluff it, then he certainly missed a fairly glorious opportunity to rub salt into Boris Johnson's wounds, even if, as Mark Blackford Ian Blackford. I always I knew. You saw my eyes then, didn't you? You saw me have a little panic. I'm going to get it wrong again. I've got such a mental blockage. I know. Oh, shameful, really. Even if he did that rather good joke about the Monty Python, it's only a flesh wound as he's walking around. Well, not walking around. He's standing there without any limbs. He should have done better than that, shouldn't he?
Keir Starmer?
Yeah. Apart from the end, the final question when the whole chamber finally went
it was
silent.
Yes, it was interesting yesterday. The Lib Dems came in for quite a lot of criticism because they said that immediately following, obviously, the vote on Monday evening, that they were going to table a vote in the House of Commons on of confidence in the Prime Minister. And the point is that by suddenly giving an opportunity to try and take the limelight away, or try and take away from Boris Johnson and try and seize what would be seen to seize the initiative, it actually isn't, because it benefits Keir Starmer not necessarily to portray himself as the adversary. And if he doesn't do particularly well at this PMQs today, that's okay. The main thing is that the Conservative MPs don't have the opportunity or are not presented with an opportunity to suddenly say, well, Keir Starmer's really the threat that you need to worry about. This would be the narrative from number 10. And so there are going to be many weeks now between now and the summer recess, 6 weeks now between now and the summer recess.
You're being objective.
I'm trying to...
You are. No, I get it. But I'd have gone in with the I'd do it again line about the parties that he reportedly said to the 22. That hasn't been denied, has it? Or even pick up on. I mean, he went in on the Dean Dorries' bizarre attack upon Jeremy Hunt, and then let it slide.
That is contested by number 10. He did say I'd do it again, but it was towards apologising. I think they were saying he'd apologise for stuff. But there's the Labour produced a leaflet yesterday, James, with on one side of the leaflet it's Boris Johnson apologising in public, and then they say in private he'd say I'd do it again.
Yes.
So they're trying to make hay out of that, but what Keir Starmer doesn't want to do is to give Boris Johnson the opportunity to frame himself as the adversary. He wants them to feel. And this is the problem the rebels have, is that they don't have a consensus. This idea of vote strikes, where they all work together to vote down legislation, is slightly for the birds, because how are you going to get somebody like Mark Francois or Andrew Bridgen to suddenly find a common ground with somebody like Jesse Norman or John Penrose?
Yes.
It's very unlikely to happen.
But they only need 40-odd, don't they, to cause problems?
Yes, but
you... They don't need all 148.
No, they don't. They need... You're quite right to say they need 40-odd, but if you look at
there might be 3 different constituencies of vote strikers. So you might have the Brexit hard man Steve Baker and Andrew Brainache Bridgen in one group of 40, and then you might have Jesse Norman and Tobias Eld in another group. I mean,
but if you look
I take your
historically,
point.
actually, as where the Tories have caused Boris Johnson the most problems when it's come to voting in the House of Commons, it was actually over the lockdown restrictions, and in those particular instances, you had MPs around the COVID recovery group, which seemed to have been spawned out of the European Research Group, coalescing alongside MPs like Theresa May, who were very unhappy with what they saw as, particularly when it came to lockdown 2, as being overly draconian rules when it came to imposing restrictions again for the winter of 2020 going into 2021. So you do need to cause real problems for the Prime Minister to have some sort of organisation between MPs within the Conservative Party who would not normally agree with one another. And at the moment,
there is none.
There is none.
And nor can there ever be, for the reasons you've just highlighted.
And you need some.
The only thing they agree on is they want to get rid of Boris Johnson. They don't agree about anything else.
And that's
it's incredible, right? That's unprecedented, isn't it?
Well, they did.
The Thatcher one was a bit like that, I think.
Yes, and that's Boris Johnson's greatest strength, is that there isn't anybody there on the backbenches who they feel that MPs feel that they could get behind. The only person I think who is slightly emerging is Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, who's got that northern. He's an MP in the north of England, up in Preston, I think, and then has that cabinet standing. Tory members like him. But at the moment, he's yet to declare his hand. He's still got, like John Major, a toothache.
I got a message off a Conservative MP the other day. I forgot to tell you. And it said, "Thank you for your kind words about me on the programme." So it wasn't Ben Wallace, to be clear. And they said, "Please don't do it again. I'm aware of what happens when you start saying nice things about my colleagues." So I'm not, in the national interest, I'm not going to say anything warm or positive about Ben Wallace, because he might end up doing a Hancock or indeed a Zahawi or, it shames me to acknowledge, a Gove.
Did you want to discuss that story that you were talking about?
Yes, so why is Nadeem Zahawi trending today?
So today is 5 years since Theresa May took a Conservative majority and reduced it to a hung parliament. And there's a man called Chris Curtis who now works for Opinion Research, who did work for YouGov at the particular time of that election where the Conservatives lost their majority. And you'll remember at the time that many polls were saying, James, that certainly at the beginning of the campaign, that the Tories were going to win a huge majority. Theresa May looking at 80
23 points ahead, I think, when the election was called.
80 to 100 seats, maybe even a three-figure majority. And then the polls started to narrow. But the one that really stuck out in all of this was a YouGov poll and what's known as an MRP poll, which is basically... What does that mean? It's basically more data points.
Right.
It's a bigger
Do we
poll.
know what MRP stands for?
Yes, I did look it up. And maybe you could look it up while I'm speaking.
Yeah, this is really professional. Go on, I'll Google it while you talk.
But basically, it takes into account more data points. Now, what Chris Curtis says, and this is where it gets interesting in his Twitter thread, and I've retweeted it if you can see it. I'm sure you've retweeted it as well. There are loads of... He said, multi-level regression and post-stratification. So we'll all forget that immediately. So they're bringing in... Rather than doing what's a normal poll is just a sample where you try and take a variation of opinions from different parts of the population and then extrapolate the numbers. An MRP poll is much more detailed. So he starts by writing, there are loads of reasons for the shift: Tory hubris, volatile electorate, manifestos, Corbyn, the Tories messing up their attack lines. But it was certainly very difficult for us pollsters to deal with. And he's talking about narrowing of the polls between Labour and the Tories. When something this dramatic happens, you struggle to believe it. He then goes on to say, the first thing I would do every morning is download the overnight data. And each day the gap was just kept getting smaller and smaller. On the morning of the Manchester bombings, we actually had Labour pulling level, although the poll got spiked because the campaign was rightly paused. And you remember that politics ceased in the wake of that appalling tragedy. But we looked at excluding people who'd joined the panel more recently, and it made no difference to the final numbers. At one point, and I feel stupid for saying this now, I seriously wondered if we'd been hacked by nefarious actors. And then we released, he continues, the MRP. This was probably the worst possible idea. The MRP was actually showing exactly the same thing as our standard polls would have, but it was the first time anybody had said hung Parliament. So rather than doing what we should have done, Chris Curtis goes on, pointing out that traditional polls were showing the gap narrowing dramatically, and this was something to be taken seriously. It was new experimental methodology that showed, and which was therefore dismissed. So they dismissed the MRP poll despite saying it was right. But then it becomes about, well, why did they dismiss the MRP? So he goes on to say, despite it being entirely predictable, everybody panicked at the backlash to the MRP. Nadeem Zahawi, who's now Education Secretary, called up the CEO of YouGov and said he would call for his resignation if he was wrong. It became pretty clear we would all be out of a job if we were wrong now. And then he takes a snapshot of, I think it's actually from of Tim Shipman's book. Zahawi phoned Stephen Shakespeare, YouGov's chief executive, and said they'll be queuing up to close you down if you're wrong on this. You've just moved the currency by 1.5%. I'm going to spare you the agony. I'm going to call for your resignation when you're wrong. It's really important, and just this is a bit of context for this, James. Political parties know that polls going in particular directions can cement opinions. Not always the case, but often cement opinions. So when we've done polls on LBC, particularly around, and I'm thinking back to the mayoral race, London-specific polls, you will often get spin doctors ring me up and say, what's your poll saying? What's your poll saying? Because they know that if it's going in the direction for them, then it will only help their cause, because people will look at that poll.
You'd think it would be the opposite, wouldn't you? You'd think if it looks like the other, it depends how close it is, I suppose, but if the people you don't want to get in are doing well in the polls, it might mobilise your voters to go out and vote for you more.
Yes, but if somebody's doing, I think what pollsters seem to think is, and what political parties seem to think is the opposite's true, is that actually it galvanises people if they're wavering to say, well, actually my vote can make a difference.
Yes.
So the vote is close. The vote is getting very close, and you would have, and certainly. You would then.
This, of course, was a point where many, many millions of people felt that perhaps a Labour victory, despite misgivings about Jeremy Corbyn, would be the last chance of a second referendum. It's a big driving force during, I mean, I'm speaking about myself, but also millions of other people as well.
And there was also the policy, nothing has changed policy around having to sell your home to pay for your care and your social care. There was also the fact that austerity was starting to bite. I'm thinking particularly around, actually, which related, and this was an attack line from Labour and from Jeremy Corbyn, was that we had these horrendous terror attacks on the London Bridge, but the police didn't have the support they needed to get out there on the streets and find out what was going on, and that's why there was an issue around civic protection. So what we saw was a narrowing of the polls, and then YouGov, this is the allegation from Chris Curtis, was being pressurised by senior Conservatives, in this case named as Nadeem Zahawi, to squish the poll, because if it were to become public, it would be damaging to their position.
So, I mean, to be clear, if I had tweeted, for example, I bet YouGov aren't releasing debate poll results because they're too positive for Labour, back in 2017, you'd be called a conspiracy theorist or a tinfoil hat wearer, and that is what YouGov have essentially just conceded. Or what?
No. This guy does. Chris Curtis no longer works for YouGov. He did work for YouGov.
That is what a key member of YouGov staff has essentially just claimed.
Exactly, and he's well respected.
No, clearly, no reason why he shouldn't be. Has Zahawi responded to this yet?
Not that I've seen. No.
Will he bother? I mean, it's a world in which you don't have to address accusations, do you? Because
5 years ago.
Boris Johnson is in charge, and indeed. It happened 5 years ago. So, I mean, it's not a reason not to trust YouGov's polling results, is it? I mean, it's difficult for them.
The polling was bang on.
Yes.
And the accusation is that, the polling's bang on, and the point is that actually, rather than releasing that, there was pressure not to release that data because it would be damaging to the Conservatives.
There's apparently Johnson's just been told that a 13-year-old girl has been sent back to Ukraine by the Home Office, separated from her 18-year-old sister. Can we see if we can dig that out?
Yeah, I'll dig that out.
I mean, partly because it sounds very interesting, partly because I've got no plan what to do between now and 1 o'clock. I've got a few woke watches. Should we do a few woke watches? Is that anything else?
No, I'll dig that out.
What I'd do now if I was an old school news editor, I'd go and get me a story before 1 o'clock today, or I won't have you on the programme for 6 months. How would he ever survive? How would we ever get through the day without Theo Usherwood's contributions? Never mind a month. 12:46 is the time. It is 10 minutes to 1. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I mean, if you care about such things, and I know that you should, but I also do understand why perhaps you have to pretend that you don't. You'd be interested perhaps to learn that the OECD, that's the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, an intergovernmental organisation with 38 member countries that was founded in 1961 to stimulate economic progress and world trade. So probably part of the metropolitan liberal elite or the Ramona conspiracy, when you hear what they are now reporting. Economic growth in the UK will grind to a halt next year, with only Russia, which is, of course, hobbled by sanctions at the moment, performing worse among the G20 leading economies. That's the OECD forecast as published today. Now, listen, it's not... it's a prediction, a forecast, so it could prove to be wrong. But if it was the other way round, I think it's important to ask yourself, if the OECD had forecast this morning that the UK was set to have the best performing economy, the highest level of economic growth in the G20, which is essentially the sort of developed world or the top 20 developed countries, what do you think this government would, what would Boris Johnson be doing with that? He'd probably be calling it the G80. So that is there. They also offer up reasons for the appalling economic growth, and they largely boil down to economic policies on taxation and spending and problems trading, friction being introduced to our trading. Now, I can't think of anything that might, in a single word beginning with B, sum up why we would be uniquely positioned to suffer from changes to trading or frictions being introduced to trading with our most popular partners. Can you? I really feel like, Keith, put your hand down. I'm being sarcastic. I really feel that I'm letting you down at the moment by not being across issues such as this one. But what could it possibly be about the United Kingdom that explains why countries and markets with which we once traded frictionlessly and easily are now much harder to trade with, and that having an impact on our economy, our economic growth, contributing to forecasts that suggest it is essentially going to be the worst in the world in unsanctioned countries by this time next year. Just so you know, there's no pleasure in any of this stuff. Now, I've got 12:52, 6 minutes left, and I'm going to try and either, unless Theo gets down here quick with that story I asked him to look into, I'm going to try and do 3 separate woke watches, okay? And they vary from the ridiculous to the really rather serious. And I think I'll start, well, wait and see. Woke Watch. Germany 1, England 1. Viewers blast awful Channel 4 coverage. I don't know if we're ever going to get anything from Woke Watch that isn't coming from the Daily Mail's website these days. I mean, listen, there is an email address that you can send your stories to, which is wokewatch@lbc.co.uk. So the Daily Mail claim that viewers blast awful Channel 4 football coverage of England's Nations League match with Germany after broadcaster seized rights from ITV. And you do what some of us do, because that's how our minds work. You read the story. TV viewers have slammed Channel 4's awful and painful to watch football coverage, and you dig into it and you think, what are they cross about, these people? What are they actually complaining about? Here's one. Sorry, but moving it to Channel 4 is awful. It's all too PC. What's PC about it? I didn't watch the coverage on. I don't know. Why would it be PC? Does it feature women? It could. I don't know. But what I do know is this. They've got some tweets here. Here's one. Can we all agree Channel 4 coverage of football is awful? It's amateur hour stuff, says another tweet. Their presenting team are awful, yada, yada. Here it is. It's all. This new lot appeal to the woke snowflake PC brigade. It's language that you've probably heard before. And that is apparently the evidence that it is as woke as possible. There's nothing in this article that suggests why it is actually woke. Does anyone know why it was woke? What were they actually complaining about? I don't know, but I do know this. The 4 tweets quoted, one account has 103 followers, another has 63 followers, another is an NFL, that's an American football enthusiast, and the other is a fan of WWE, the wrestling. So I think what happens now on these newspapers is you do searches for certain terms, and if you can find a story saying that, look, we found some fella, he doesn't have any followers, but he's saying it's woke, then the Mail Online gets a story out of it. There was an amazing little roundup of attacks on Meghan Markle as well, which were done in a similar way, finding tweets. And talking about outrage and a storm of protest about I did a tweet in support of Meghan Markle that got just shy of 120,000 likes. By the Daily Mail's own metric, that should be on the front page. If you're counting the amount of action that a tweet gets slagging off Meghan Markle and then writing an article when 6 people and a dog have tweeted something that tallies with your own probably racist editorial policy, that's a massive story. Then a tweet in favour of her that gets nearly 120,000 likes, that should probably be on the news at 10. But these are strange times.
Woke Watch.
Oh, now I have to do it again.
Woke Watch.
Trigger warning for forensic science students who are told that courses will contain images of murder, violence and death at the University of Exeter. So there's this university, right, called the University of Exeter, and there's this course, right, which is forensic science, and there's this person who actually runs the forensic science course at the university. She's called Dr. Katie Solomon, and she thought it was important to give students a proper heads up that the stuff they'll be studying next term is going to be absolutely bloody grisly. I don't know whether you've got a wife who routinely turns off things like Midsummer Murders because the scenes are a bit too bloody, or possibly in the nastier stuff like what's the one with Amelia Fox called? What's the one with Amelia Fox who actually does the forensic science? Silent Witness. Is it Silent Witness? Well, anyway, that stuff. People who... So the point about this is some students will have signed up for the course and they won't necessarily be ready yet for the absolute grizzle that is going to appear in some of their lessons. So it simply states the content of the forensic science contains images, depictions and descriptions of murder, sexual assault, self-harm, violence and death that some students may find offensive or traumatising. It's a bit like when you hear a radio presenter say, what I'm about to talk to you now is quite unpleasant, so just be aware of that before we talk about it. And no one would ever turn around and say, you don't need to warn us, it's a news programme, we know it's going to be grisly, in the same way that no one would ever turn around and say, how dare you warn us that there might be some really, really traumatising and potentially triggering material being put in front of our eyes in a moment. So that's another example of how absolutely ludicrous Woke Watch is.
Woke Watch.
And finally, the serious one.
Woke Watch.
Has Love Island gone too woke? Viewers complain about the guilty pleasure of virtue signalling, whatever the hell that means. And they have actually, in their defence, come up with quite a lot of quotes here. PC Woke Brigade ruined my Love Island. They can't change Love Island. Absolute disgrace. Bet the woke mob has something to do with this. Also, it's so funny. They were going for their big woke points with a more diverse cast. Yes, down with that sort of thing. And the public immediately ruined it all by only coupling POC, that would be person of colour, with person of colour. Not remotely racist at all. And what, of course, is serious about this is that 2 former contestants on Love Island, and I'm about to refer to acts of suicide, so consider this a trigger warning if that is something that you are currently struggling with, have taken their own lives. So they've introduced a duty of care, including comprehensive psychological support, and clearly editorial decisions designed to minimise the psychological impact of what has previously been described as a television programme that may have contributed to the mental health declines of people who'd previously appeared on it. So, yeah, down with that sort of thing, because something woke mob, something, woke mob, something.
Woke Watch.
Incredibly, that's brought us in on time. If you'd like to submit something for my increasingly popular, although increasingly irritating Woke Watch feature, then the email address you need is wokewatch@lbc.co.uk. Here's Sheila Fogarty.
None of that nonsense in the next 3 hours. Thanks very much indeed, James. 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 Thanks